Hi everybody and welcome back to Save Point Tomorrow. I am Neon Lore and thanks for coming back. The last video went a little too long, so I had to split it up into part 1 and part 2. But let's go ahead and jump into the second part of this video where we'll be talking about utopias, how they compare to dystopias, and why dystopias are so much more common than utopias in science fiction. So utopias. If dystopias are warnings about what could go wrong, then utopias are dreams about what could go right. But here's the thing, utopias are rarer, trickier, and sometimes they're just dystopias with good PR. And we'll be seeing that here in a couple of examples about how utopias, in their mad scramble to try to make a perfect world, they end up turning it into a darker, more chaotic and dreadful place to live in. So where does all this start? Where does the concept of a utopia come from? Well, the first use of the word utopia is from 1516 by Sir Thomas More in his book known as Utopia, funnily enough. He created it from the Greek words, or from the Greek utopos, which means no place, and from the other Greek word of utopos, which means good place. The first one, no place, implying that it doesn't exist, and the second, good place, implying perfection. A lot of what we'll see with utopia, or what is seen in his book of Utopias, is widely discussed as either being a satire or satirical critique of 16th century Europe, or it was actually a genuine ideal. Because in the book of Utopia, you see communal property, religious tolerance, universal education, and shirk work days, which was in very short existence at the time. But you also see slavery as punishment, strict laws and social control, which is a key factor in dystopias, by the way, and limited personal freedom. So even in the book Utopia, which is supposed to be kind of like the groundwork for what this perfect idealized society looks like, it's not pretty. While yes, on the surface it's all good and all, deep down when you start to look into more of the social stratas and how everything is put together, it's all put together in ways that are or today are considered as unsavory. And it's one of the reasons why utopias kind of give themselves to become dystopias more easily. But let's look at some examples, primarily two major examples, as there's probably like two of the biggest and most well-known examples of utopias out there. Well, in science fiction, there are two gold standards for utopias: Star Trek's Federation and Ian M. Banks's The Culture. Both imagine a future without poverty or disease, but they get there in completely different ways. And we'll come to see that those different ways is predominantly how these civilizations govern themselves. In The Culture, the society as a whole is run by benevolent, super intelligent, almost godlike artificial intelligences, which are known as minds. They control everything from defense to society to government. The society itself has no money. There's no need for money because the AIs control everything. There's no government because, again, the AIs control everything. And there's no compulsory work because there's no need for it. People only work if they want to. Citizens can alter their bodies, minds, and even genders at will. So if you don't feel like being this person anymore, you can completely shift it into a different aspect or a different person at will, because of how ridiculously advanced the civilization is in just not technology but biotechnology. Conflict in both the Federation, or in both Star Trek and The Culture, comes from the external aspect of how they react, how they actually interact with the rest of the universe at large. The Culture conflict happens outside of this utopian society. It's handled by a covert group called Special Circumstances. They're the ones that are usually having to deal with the more gray and difficult aspects of a perfect society interacting with a galaxy that is not as perfect as they are. And you can think of the motto for the culture as "we know better and we'll help you whether you like it or not." Whether on the Federation side, they're led by a democratic republic, which is run by elected officials, and it is basically a perfect democratic republic run by elected officials. It's not like all corrupted and whatnot like you see in modern real society. It is also a post-scarcity utopia, just like the culture, at least internally, but it still trades with other civilizations. Exploration is led by Starfleet, which doubles as defense. And like in the culture, and like I said earlier, it's where the primary examples of conflict happens. And the Federation is guided by Starfleet General Order 1, which is also known as the Prime Directive, which basically boils down to non-interventionism. But it's basically no member of Starfleet may interfere with the natural development of any pre-warp civilization. No cultural, technological, or political influence is allowed. So they can't interfere with civilizations that haven't discovered warp technology, which is the technology that allows you to travel faster than light. And you can think of it as, we'll help you, but only if you ask. And that's kind of the biggest difference between the two. The culture is a perfect society that has no need for pretty much anything because you have everything, and you're basically maintained perfect by super intelligent AIs. And it will fix you regardless of whether you want it to or not. While in the Federation, it's a lot more about choice, and therefore it gives you that kind of wiggle room to become dystopian, or it allows you to kind of break from the mold and become a deviant in the eyes of the rest of society. So really, which society would you like to live in? So which utopia is better, I guess the question is? The one that leaves you alone unless you ask, or the one that fixes your problems whether you want them to or not? And that really comes down to, I guess, preference. If, at least in my opinion, I would think that a society that lets you choose is more human, and it's more understanding that people make decisions that are not necessarily best for themselves, and they do that in order to grow. And a godlike AI wouldn't necessarily understand that. Again, like I said, when it comes down to utopias, at least the two gold standards of the culture and Star Trek, it really comes down to governance. Who is governing both societies? Because in the case of the culture, it's a godlike AI that can just fix everything when it wants to, and it really only works on defending itself from external threats. And it is so ridiculously advanced it can fix people's problems. So people don't really have a need to do anything unless they want to. And I guess that has its own benefits. Like, you don't really have to think for yourself. You don't really have to really be afraid of having to choose, because something that people will come to realize later in life is that choice is as much of a curse as it is a gift, because sometimes people are paralyzed by choice. Choice paralysis is a thing, and when you have too many choices, you kind of stand there and you stare blankly at all the choices. It's one of the reasons why in the real world restaurants like Chick-fil-A are so popular and so effective, is because they don't give you that many choices. You go to Chick-fil-A to eat chicken, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. In the case of the Federation, you are given a little bit more leeway. You're given the opportunity to be a deviant. You're given the opportunity to stray from what is considered correct or what is considered acceptable by society, and therefore it seems to have a little bit more of a I don't want to say grown-up perspective, but it's a lot less nanny bot trying to take care of everyone, and more of like, we are doing this because we choose to be better, instead of we are doing this because the machine chose for us. And I guess that's the biggest distinction when it comes to utopias. Although all this doesn't really matter unless both societies have a post-scarcity basically standard of living, where you don't need to work to be, you know, fed or housed or have your health taken care of. Also, the governments don't crack down on any sort of like religious dissonance, or in the case of sci-fi, sorry, not sci-fi, in the case of Star Trek, religion is Star Trek is a very much a communist utopia, where it's like there is no religion of sorts. Religion is seen in other aspects that is not part of the Federation, because the Federation is a fully it's a fully non-religious organization. It's completely secular. It's completely atheist. And it fully follows the concept of just technology. And again, it's the same in the culture. The technology has reached such a point where you no longer need these kinds of basic needs fulfilled by either work or hunting or anything along those lines. So you can now focus on doing things that are more of your choosing, or are more seen as hobbies or arts or things along those lines. And that's kind of that's another key aspect. Like, none of this matters if the societies don't have the ability to have post-scarcity. Because at the end of the day, if you don't need to work or hunt or do anything in order to meet all your basic needs, then you no longer need to focus on something that is basically survival. You can focus on, quote unquote, the betterment of you as a person, or the betterment of your society as a whole, which I guess kind of deviates from where dystopias are located, because dystopias in a lot of sci-fi are shown as being post-scarcity, but they're actually not. A lot of times the post-scarcity of like the overall obedient population or the wealthy is at the expense of the poor. That can be seen through throw a dart at a dystopia, be it either Snowpiercer or the Hunger Games or any other one, where technology is advanced to the point where, yes, we could be post-scarcity, but we're deciding not to. We're deciding to be post-scarcity only for a few. And that's where dystopias and utopias kind of start diverging from each other. It's who benefits from the overall super advanced scientific advancements, who benefits from society. Is it everyone is going to benefit from society and we're going to approach our future together, or is it more of this technology and these benefits are only for the few and the wealthy and those who are deemed to be better? And that's kind of where you see dystopias begin to diverge into topics like loss of identity, or totalitarian control through information, emotional suppression via either medication or technological or sociological means, the focus on technocracy over rationalization, sorry. And it's where kind of like dystopias and utopias really distinguish themselves between being the perfect and or almost unachievable society and the probably more realistic version of what a hyper-advanced post-scarcity society may look like. And this is where we kind of come into the question of why dystopias are much more prevalent in our science fiction, why we like to write our stories in these societies that are so much darker and much more gritty and totalitarian. And the answer, whether we want to accept it or not, is simple. Totalitarian dystopias are easier to write because it's something that we know more of as a species than we do perfection. Totalitarian dystopias are something that has been around since forever, really. And maybe not dystopias, but totalitarian governments have been around forever. And the concept of a technologically advanced hyper society that focuses on really maintaining its hyper level of technology via either totalitarian surveillance or the oppression of its people is not something that really is that all far from what we can see in real life. I mean, if a government is capable of using its power in extreme ways to be able to maintain that power, it's gonna do so, and it's been seen time and time before, be it either the Soviet Union, the CCP, the situation in Venezuela, or if you want to be even more jaded and pessimistic, you can see it through the United States and how it controls most of the global economy via its use of military might. And all this is to say that the reason why dystopias are easier to write is because it's something that we're more akin to. It's something that we're more used to. It's something that we can see in our daily lives. In at least if, you know, the concept of a hyper technology would come to pass. It's something that is more human in a way, because as people, as humans, we always want to protect ourselves and protect our own. And it will lead us to wanting to do that via any means necessary. And we love dystopias because they warn us as well. We love dystopias because they warn us. The real question is, do we love utopias enough to try to build them? Well, or do we love dystopias even more? I mean, we write more dystopias because fear is easier to imagine than perfection, like I said, and because broken worlds make better stories. At the end of the day, if you have perfect societies with no real conflict, then what's the point of writing a story, you know? You don't go through any of the multiple layers or the multiple cycles of the hero's journey or anything along those lines. If there's no conflict, there's no need to move the plot forward. And that's really, in a way, you can almost look at it as that is a very human way of looking at things. I mean, maybe a different society that is not human, either be it robotic or alien, would see it differently. But at the same time, like, you know, a body in motion tends to stay in motion, and a body at rest tends to stay at rest. So if there's no need to evolve the situation, if there's no need to move the plot because there's no cause for it, then there's really no need to do anything, really. You remain in stasis. And that's the problem with utopias. If you have a perfect world, if you have a perfect society, then what's the point of doing anything, really? What's the point of having a story? What's the point of forwarding the plot, you may say? But if that utopia tends to actually be more of a dark and gritty location, but it's, you know, plastered over with a veneer of happiness and perfection, then whenever you actually see the man behind the curtain, you are almost compelled to solve the problem, because then you've led an entire life thinking that you've done nothing but feed the machine. You've done nothing but believe that you lived in a perfect world, when really the hyper nutritious food that you were eating was actually just people. In the case of Soylent Green, or in the case of Snowpiercer, it was, you know, insects. But it's, again, we come to the point where dystopias are just more popular to write because it's something that we can relate to more. It's something that we understand better than the concept of perfection, which is kind of a downer, if you think about it. If the idea of a dystopian society is so popular that it actually becomes ingrained in science fiction in our real life, like everything that we write that is sci-fi, the biggest stories that are sci-fi tend to be the ones that have the more complex and difficult stories to write as far as kind of morality is concerned. And a utopia doesn't really allow itself for that, because difficult moral questions in a world that is perfect is not something that you're going to find unless it's a world that is perfect that interacts with a world that isn't perfect, kind of in the case of the culture. But again, dystopias are easier to write, and they probably tend to resonate with people a lot more because, as I said, they are, and how I said in the previous video as well, they're cautionary tales. They are, you know, if technology reaches a point of hyper advancement, where do we draw the line between, you know, giving people what they want and controlling people, or making them think that this is what they want? At what point do we believe that, you know, a sapient being is sapient and it is not just a mechanical servant? And at what point does that mechanical servant deserve rights? So, well, that's something that this channel as a whole is gonna actually start looking into more. The next video that I'm thinking of doing is probably rogue AI and sentient AI, and kind of how it's represented in not just sci-fi but also real life. So I would love for you to keep following. If you have any ideas of a topic that you think would be good to talk about, or a topic that you would love to have me talk about in later videos, if you want me to talk about more about, you know, what makes us human, because I saw a couple of my shorts actually did really well with the topic of human and post-human. You know, I can look into that. I can look into what the concept of transhumanism and how in universes like Warhammer 40k being post-human is so much it's more than just being human. You're basically a different species at that point. But anyway, with all of that being said, thank you so much for watching. I am constantly bettering myself and trying to better myself, so if you do have any other comments that might make me better at making these videos, then please let me know. But again, thank you so much for watching. Feel free to subscribe, like, and share if you feel like this is something that you wouldn't mind sharing, and I will see you in the next one. Later.